Welcome back, everybody. I am Vincent Mentz, owner of Three Nails Information Security. Today, I am joined by Roger Hill, who is the founding partner at Hillstrong Group Security and expert in OT. And I'm really excited to hear about everything Roger has to tell us and share with us from his wealth of knowledge and his OT background. Roger, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, wow, where do I start? I'll try to give the short version, right?
Okay.
So, first of all, it's great to join you, Vincent.
Thanks. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this discussion. So, my name's Roger Hill. I've been in this OT space or operational technology long before they coined the phrase OT. So, I started in this space in the 90s, working for some manufacturing companies. Then started with Siemens and worked 16 plus years at Siemens, always on the industrial side, application engineering, systems engineering, um, global subject matter expert for distributed SCADA systems, and ultimately went to leading the security business for Siemens for the industrial security services, building out services business for Siemens clientele across the globe. Um, did about 4 years in a tech startup as a CTO, co-founder of an industrial software-defined networking company, working with the U.S. Department of Energy. A large project that kind of funded us and got us started, and trying to solve security in a novel way. Until I went back to another large vendor, Rockwell Automation, where I was leading product security for the controller and visualization business. So from there, went over to a large Swiss company, Kudelski Security, where I led the global OT security business. So I think when I look at my career, it's really interesting of having worked in many different industrial verticals. So I've designed a lot of the systems that we're trying to secure, but I've also worked with the product security to secure those components that are used in automating these cyber physical systems. So geek speak for I've done a lot.
No kidding. My goodness. Man, I'm sure working in each of those verticals poses different challenges. I'm really curious to hear some of the unique challenges to each of those verticals, or maybe one that's consistent among each, as far as some of the things maybe manufacturers face surrounding OT security. You have any that you could talk about here?
Wow. Yeah. So I think when I started my career with Siemens, before that point, I was always subject to this about 12 to 18-month window where I became bored, and boredom was my enemy. So one of the things I really appreciated about my career at Siemens, I was never bored once.
Mm.
I was always thrown into another set of challenges with another vertical, and I
Mm.
really enjoyed that. Enjoyed the technology, the
Love
people,
that.
and the processes. So I think when you look at manufacturing, there's a lot of unique constraints there, because a lot of people they think about, well, you have this automated manufacturing line that you have to secure. It just lags behind IT. Well, they don't really realize how that industry actually works.
Mm.
An assembly line, while it's automated, is really comprised of predominantly a bunch of machines that are built by different OEMs or original equipment manufacturers. Each one of these machines performs a certain function, like pick and place machine,
Mm-hmm.
a packaging machine, a filler machine. So they all have their own little island of performing a function, and all of these are hooked together in a line, typically connected with conveying or conveyors. Right? And now you have a production line. Um, the difference between a discrete manufacturing environment is that has a linear start and stop process. Or I'm going to start my production run. I need 100,000 widgets in this production run. Right? That's a discrete manufacturing. Process manufacturing, on the other hand, is a continuous process where it's a chemical reaction. So that's where you think of refineries, specialty chemicals, things of that nature. So they all have their own unique constraints in how do you secure these things. And these things, they can be quite old from a legacy standpoint. And What a lot of the IT world doesn't realize is some of the unique challenges and constraints there is just how business is executed. So, for example, let's take a factory that you have 4 production lines. You don't just turn a magical key and then upgrade all 5 production lines. The way it actually works is it's a multi-year CapEx project, and it's probably upgrading 1 production line at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, and this is some of the challenges, when you upgrade a lot of these technologies and components, in order to intercommunicate with some of the legacy systems, you're having to step back in terms of technology capabilities, right? So then what really becomes interesting out of that 5-year process, 5-year project to really do this refresh on the multiple production lines, you don't go back and actually upgrade the technology and the communications to what they actually could or should be, right? So, I think in my 30 almost years of, working with industrial systems, honestly, I probably have seen what 5 to 10 greenfield facilities, meaning plants built from the ground up. It's mostly brownfield upgrades. So that's really the
Wow.
challenge. How do you secure these legacy environments,
Mm.
and also working with a lot of the digitalization initiatives? So there's a lot of unique challenges, but I think one of the biggest challenges for manufacturers that are starting to build a program is number one, who is looking to secure it? Is it OT personnel at the site level? They have an easier mission.
Mm-hmm.
What if it's the CISO that has a global fleet of sites of 100 manufacturing sites, and he was just notified that he or she is now responsible for all that security, and they're trying to wrap their arms around that problem set. And the problem set is very primitive. Number one, what do you even have? You have to understand what you have and understand its inherent impacts to the business. So, yeah, it's a daunting task for a lot of CISOs that are
Wow.
just inheriting this problem set.
That is sounds like a very difficult challenge to even sort of assess the breadth of those networks if there's large manufacturing plants, and let alone assess the security of them. Maybe tell us a little bit about the strategy behind assessing the security of these plants. I mean, such large networks, diverse, manufacturing plants, different sets of technology. Tell us a little bit about that methodology.
Yeah, sure. So let me take 2 different approaches to this. First of all, let's maybe talk about a plant level first, and just kind of the systematic, often even primitive elements that you're using. And then maybe look at it from that CISO perspective of a fleet of sites. They're 2 completely different problem sets. At that plant level, there's some really good frameworks to use. Quite frankly, the NIST CSF, when you get down to the subcategories, it's going to point back to IEC 62443, 2-1, and 3-3, and others as well. IEC 62443 is probably the predominant standard globally for industrial control systems or industrial automation control systems. There's also some really good work done by NIST with 882, and they're at Rev 3 now. And this is the Guide to Industrial Control System Cybersecurity. Speaking of the NIST CSF, NIST also did some really good work in terms of it's the NIST IR Series 8183. I really talk about the series quite a bit because number one, they have a manufacturing process. A manufacturing profile, but they also have a process automation profile. This is really great for those just starting their journey because it really kind of shows a fictitious facility and kind of nuts to bolts how to approach it across people, process, or technology. Now, first step is kind of taking your framework. But what I like to do at the plant level is just spend that first day just understanding what are you making, how do you make it. Not even talk about any technology yet. I just want to understand that from the raw materials coming in through the exiting finished product. What is that process? Because once I can understand that process, then I can start to map those processes and sub processes to the actual industrial automation control system elements that are what we call the cyber physical system, automating that process, right? Then we can kind of take that to the next level, which is understanding, okay, what is the impact, right, of that sub process or that machine we're talking about? Okay, if you lose that machine, does the entire production line stop? Or can that machine be bypassed because you actually have several, right? So it's kind of a continuity of operations. But then going through some exercises of loss of view, loss of control, again, understanding that risk. Based upon that understanding, it's also looking at what existing controls do you have? Do you have an industrial DMZ that really separates where the carpet meets the concrete, right? And the principle there is to separate, have that segmentation, segregation between IT and OT, and only mission critical information is flowing out. And that's always necessary because on the that level 4 of that Purdue model, the site operations, there are some critical elements there. And a lot of folks in the industrial control system security community, they don't like to focus on that level 4 system, because that level 4, you're talking about things such as manufacturing execution systems, MES, but you have your production inventory systems as well, right? The ordering and scheduling of your raw materials for your productions. You have your maintenance systems. If you're a distribution center, you have your automated warehouse management system. The reality, though, is often if any of these systems are compromised and brought down, what is the impact? Does it shut down production? If so, do you even have to get into the process control network or the control system network? So you need to understand the entire system and the mission as a whole. And then there's some primitive things. So, for example, just taking some recording some PCAPs, for example, off of some span or mirrored ports of industrial switching. So you can kind of do some analysis of that network traffic, and then analyzing the configurations of some of the engineering workstations and other components, just to really get a good snapshot of what is the current state of vulnerabilities, and then what is the actual risk to that system based upon where that component is connected and how it's connected, not necessarily just taking that CVSS score. All right, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I pause you right there? Because that's actually a really neat point that you ended with there. I love that you just described analyzing sort of the network protocol level of network communication, because that's something I often do when I'm hunting for really low-level vulnerabilities in protocols, or the way that applications are interacting to their server. So that's familiar to me. I understand that. Who do you feel like should be doing that, and how often? Because that just sounded a little bit out of place considering the security posture. That seems like a deep analysis, maybe bringing in a third party to help you do that, or I could almost even imagine that being done completely agnostic of your manufacturing plant and doing it out of band. Just tell me a little bit more about that. Then we'll talk a little bit more about something.
And I'll try to make this one a little bit more brief. But this is what I would say. If you're a small manufacturer, right? One thing you can look at is, and this is the question I usually pose to like the maintenance manager. When a production line goes down, no matter what shift it is or what day it is, what's the first name that comes to your mind of who you're going to call, right? It's not Ghostbusters, right? It's who are you going to call? And it's Bob, Gary, Susan, whatever.
Sure.
There's one person that can get on that PLC, get online, force some, an IO point to bypass a critical sensor that has failed, or whatever the case may be. Whoever that person is probably a very good person to maybe tap as a subject matter expert of the different systems and processes. And they would have a lot of the necessary skill set to assess risk at that plant level. Now, what I would say is, looking at this from that CISO perspective, when you're looking at 50 sites across the globe, that's a different problem set, right? So what I like to do at that level is looking at things from a maturity-based assessment. For example, maybe utilizing like a CMMI with a NIST CSF, because that creates a really good baseline of indicating what is your current state across all the CSF functions, and measuring that against that target state, and that gives us that roadmap of where we want to be, and we just have to determine what is our appetite. So that gives us our roadmap for what to do, because from there, what we have to really think through is what are the necessary critical controls that we need to deploy and where. So part of that is looking at that fleet of 50 manufacturing sites. Not all sites are created equal. And I guarantee you something, almost every single manufacturer has 50 sites or more. They got there through acquisition as well. So when you acquire other companies, you have mixed disparate systems. So it's looking holistically at your fleet of sites and understanding what is the business impact for those sites. So for example, do you have 10 manufacturing sites that are actually producing goods that are used in your supply chain at your other 40 manufacturing sites? If so, they have maybe a more inherent set of risk. Or maybe you're a manufacturer servicing an automotive sector, right?
Okay.
Now you're dealing with maybe some just-in-time manufacturing.
Sure.
Now, just-in-time manufacturing means there's no inventory; it's real time. So if you have any downtime, there's huge fines that are applicable because you've caused an outage not just for that vendor, but you've impacted all the other suppliers to that vendor. So you have to look at it slightly differently when you're looking at the program level or in scaling across in enterprise versus at the plant level.
Okay. I want to rewind a little bit. You had mentioned a term that was digitization. As it relates to manufacturing plants and securing them in the OT environment, what role does digitization play in that? Is there an increased level of security that comes from
A terrible role.
Okay.
No, I joke. So one of the misnomers here that I want to kind of mention is there's been an element of digitalization since we went digital. And what I mean by that, before we even hit the year 2000, I remember deploying distributed SCADA systems that had the integrated web servers where we were running thin clients on the factory floor.
Yeah.
So, all right, well over 20 years ago, right? So having said that, when we look at other digitalization initiatives such as Industry 4.0 and others, now what we're looking at is a manufacturer that has to be globally competitive. To be globally competitive, they need to have faster decision making. So that means bringing those capabilities down on that shop floor and empowering those with the information to be able to make the decisions quickly and efficiently so that they can be effective and efficient in their production. So what does that actually look like? Well, more than likely, that looks like maybe bringing some type of a tablets and some different type of connectivity down to that shop floor. The reality, though, from a cybersecurity perspective, is it's an exponential increase of the attack surface, right? Part of and this is one of the things with technology, there's just been almost an irresponsible, in some ways, adoption of technology without just the due diligence and the engineering practices that really got us to where we are today. And what I mean by that is this explosion of IoT devices. Now you're looking at sensors that are dual homed, right? So we have what we call the Purdue model, which is a philosophical separation on a plant floor. It's not often realized, but where you separate that control system network from the process control network, from the higher level, and then the very low level is the field device network. Well, the reality is theoretically you were only allowing communication one level up, one level down. Well, that smart sensor now might be doing that and connecting directly to that PLC. The reality is there might be an LTE network component to that, where they're sending telemetry data right to that vendor. So that vendor can realize predictive maintenance and all these additional cloud-based values so they can capture more of that automation dollar. Well, now what you've created is this spaghetti work of different communication data flows. And this is a challenge. So one of the most critical factors is for any manufacturer that's looking at a digitalization initiative, ensure that cybersecurity is in lockstep in the planning and the design and the execution, not after the fact. That's probably the biggest takeaway.
Okay. Okay. Actually, before I respond, looks like we're getting a couple comments. Oh, no questions so far. Actually, we're good here. Yeah, that's interesting that you describe sort of the integration of all of these not existing attack surfaces. As an attacker, more attack surface guarantees more job security for me. So from that perspective, yeah, I get that. I also hear different avenues of entry potentially, right? If, for example, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, and most probably may not comprehend this at a high level here, but if we're able to compromise the manufacturer creating that connection between, you said, was it to the PLC or whatever aggregate systems there are in the OT network, speaking to the cloud, there's potential entry point from the cloud in all of a sudden, which may not be existing. I'm curious, like what the attack surfaces that you see most often, if it's like, in my point of view and in my experience in the service offerings, Three Nails brings is one aspect of assessing the security of a network is through physical means and bringing engineers to a facility, see if we can break into the facility in daylight, do some techniques to, shim a door or duplicate ID clone, RFIDs and things like that, and get in and plug devices into the network. But I'm really not sure. I haven't actually been on an OT site before where there's technology present that I can even interface with necessarily. So I'm curious if the physical level of security is more important and significant, or if it's like the software level. Are these devices in these OT networks internet connected at all? What does the attack surface look like in these OT networks?
That's a good question. It depends on the sector predominantly. So I just clicked over on the comments because I thought we had some questions, and got to give a shout out to my buddy Marco there. Hey, Marco. But listen, let's look at manufacturing because we've been on that theme, right? So I think when you're looking at this attack surface, unfortunately, the level of segmentation isn't really where it should be for a lot of manufacturing.
Okay.
And this is usually where I start the conversation for a manufacturer. If you haven't really focused on any type of segmentation, your first order of business is separate IT from OT. Just try to get that initial segmentation by implementing firewall and having that strong boundary. Ideally, doing this with an industrial DMZ, right? So that industrial DMZ, the theoretical approach to this is to create a separate network that is the in-between land between the carpet and the concrete, right?
Okay.
So that anything that's needing information from the shop floor, it's acquired by the industrial DMZ devices. And then the higher level system is allowed access. So that's kind of that fundamental approach. If you already have that segmentation, then the next order in a very pragmatic way is create a separation between that process control network. Think of this as the network where the human is interacting and the control system network. The predominant reason for this is that this is your best weapon or your tool set, if you will, to use against existing vulnerabilities and future vulnerabilities that I guarantee will be there, right? And what do I mean by that? So currently there's some perfect 10.0 CVS vulnerabilities for Rockwell automation, control logics. And, I think one of the challenges as a vendor when you go through the scoring exercise is you're having to look at this through this lens of, okay, is this public facing? Is this component, so one of the examples is we're looking, does it require local access or remote access? So we're looking at a particular vulnerability that has remote access capability with remote code execution, perfect 10.0, right? Well, the reality is at that manufacturer, if I've got that plant DMZ, now my control is of course several layers behind that. The reality is that's probably going to require local access, not remote access. Maybe we drop it down to a 7.6. So there's an element of understanding what is the actual score within my facility, because it's not necessarily about patching. In fact, often you can't patch. Instead, it's mitigating the risk through other controls. That's why it's really crucial to have that capability.
That is a similar tone I've heard actually with the previous podcast guest of ours. Oftentimes these OT devices don't even get patches. They're end of life and they're too expensive to replace. And so the best security control you can do is just segregate it or, logically separate it.
Well, Vince, if I could just jump in, and I'll make this one, I promise, under 30 seconds. Sure. I think one of the principal philosophical approaches of security for industrial control systems for a while has been defense in depth. And that's simply the idea of having different layers of security. And this is very intentional in nature because it gives us each layer gives us the ability to detect a threat. Earlier and earlier, until at a certain point, what it becomes is living off the land. It's I don't necessarily even need the vulnerabilities. If I'm on that local control network, I can leverage the existing functionality of the components to cause the damage and accomplish the mission.
Okay. Actually, that's a perfect segue into my last question, bringing up technologies or trends sort of coming down the pipeline that you see that will make the biggest impact on OT security and manufacturing. Do you have any thoughts as to what the solutions to these issues might be that we're seeing come down the pipe here?
I'm gonna talk about something that's not sexy. It's not technology. Honestly, we've got technology out there. Let's look at a couple weeks ago, the CrowdStrike, right? If I'm just hoping that was a little bit of a wake-up call for a lot of the manufacturing space. What the media is not talking about there, media focus has been strictly on airlines and banking, and no one's talking about the manufacturing sites were shut down. So the reality is that was a process issue, both at CrowdStrike, but also for the owner-operators, right? Number one, having the ability that if you're going to roll out some update, do a staged rollout, right? Do a controlled, gated rollout. And that way you're at least limiting the impact. It's just good process. So I think if we truly look at security of industrial control systems through the lens of people, process, and technology, we have some good technology solutions out there. Every single one of them, though, their value is completely grounded in how well were they architected, designed, and deployed. I don't care what technology stack you deploy. If you didn't architect and engineer it and tune it correctly, you're going to get limited value. So you really have to have the discipline of having some experienced people come out and assist you with this. There's a lot of great industrial security services firms out there. There's a lot of good people in this space compared to what it was like 10 years ago. So, I think that's my takeaway is it's not just a technology problem now. In fact, what I would say now, it's much more of a governance problem. What I'm seeing is boards and senior leadership are saying, wait, we've invested millions. Where's our return? right? So now I think it's about governance of what is the risk across all my fleet of sites, across the
Sure.
globe. How
Sure.
compliant are they to the program I've put in place? So I think it's about being disciplined and adding some maturity, defining process, improving that process, and continue to train personnel. And yes, acquiring and deploying technology in the right way.
Great closing thought there. I'm not even going to try to follow up with that with a comment. I think that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Roger, thank you so much for joining today. We're at the 30-minute mark. I want to just respect everybody's time, respect your time. And so we really appreciate you coming on today to share your expertise. And with all the people who are joined on the podcast here, please contact Roger for some OT security assessments. Roger, you're obviously the founder here. Maybe give us a 1 minute, description of what you're doing at Hillstrong Group Security that is changing the way the industry is doing assessments and helping the OT cybersecurity position.
Yeah. So specifically, what we're targeting the larger manufacturers and sites because they have an interesting problem set to solve. So we're looking at manufacturers that have anywhere between 25 to several hundred sites globally, and scaling out programs. This is where we kind of specialize in building business cases with the CISOs and messaging the board and really maturing programs and processes, not just working on that bottoms up approach. That's an interesting problem set. So we're specializing in OT, governance, risk, and compliance frameworks, which we really predict will be the next area of focus for the next 18 months.
Fantastic.
That's us.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Hey,
if you
thanks,
need,
Vincent. Great to talk to you.
absolutely, likewise. For anybody wanting to reach out, obviously, send a message to Roger, shoot him an email. Roger, are you on any other social media platforms?
Not intentionally.
Okay. At least not
LinkedIn.
yourself, maybe
Yeah.
some impersonator. Awesome.
Look up Roger Hill on LinkedIn. I should be the top one on the list. So.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And if you need anything as far as penetration testing services go, we've got you covered here at Three Nails. But reach out to my friend Roger here if you need any type of OT security assessments. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you guys on the next one. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, everyone.